This is the 6 o'clock session, a dialogue on rethinking urban mobility. And it's my pleasure to welcome our three panelists today. My name is Martha Thorne. I'm Dean of the IE School of Architecture and Design in Madrid and Segovia. I trained as a city planner, but that was a long time ago, and so today's discussion about mobility in smart cities, I'm sure will be very exciting and interesting. We have with us three wonderful guests. Mayor Joseph Curtatone. He is mayor of Somerville, and please help me in congratulating him because he just recently was elected to his 7th term as mayor of Somerville, Massachusetts.
When did you start? When did you start?
His city is known as one of the best-run cities in Massachusetts. He brings to it training not only as from Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, but he also studied at Boston College, and he also studied at New England School of Law, and received an MPA and an MC from Harvard. Before becoming mayor, he was an alderman, so he has an even longer career, in spite of his young age, as in city politics. Next to him, our guest is Rupert Stadler. He is the CEO of Audi. He joined Audi in 1990, and from 1997 on, he served as head of board of managers in the Volkswagen Group. And in 2003, he became a member of the Audi board of management and was appointed chairman and CEO in 2007. He also comes from a business background and is a specialist in corporate planning, controllership, finance, banking, and investment. And finally, to my right is Alan Flausch. He's Secretary General of an international organization for sustainable transportation, public transit. The UITP is a nonprofit international association, and it's a passionate champion of sustainable urban mobility. His head office, where he is Secretary General, is located in Brussels, and not only do they have that office, but there are thousands of members throughout the world with 15 regional offices. Today's debate on rethinking urban mobility will be structured that we will open with a brief statement by each of our special guests. Then there will be a series of questions that I will pose, and hopefully they will answer with lots of discussion and debate. And then we'll save the last minutes so that the audience can you can pose your questions. Mayor Curtatone, would you like to begin?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good evening. It's great to be here. Today, cities around the world are experiencing the greatest demographic shift since mid-century. In the United States, I see it in my city every day, where baby boomers, millennials, new young innovators want to live in the city regions, in the urban core, connected to lifestyle, culture, and bikeable, walkable communities. But there's a challenge for all of us. Cities have always been the center of innovation and creativity as we create the new narrative for the world, as by 2050, 3/4 of the world's population will live in the cities. How will we tackle the legacy issues of housing, public health, mobility, sustainability? The cities that can envision and plan for that future, that can build their communities at a human scale, that can understand the opportunity to leverage private sector technology deployment, along with governance, leadership, community empowerment, will be the cities that succeed. So I hope today in our conversation, as I share my perspective on mobility as an important thread to sew all those themes together, I can share some of those experience, but it's fantastic to be here as part of this distinguished panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stadler.
So, thank you, Mrs. Thorne, for your warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to join you at the Smart City World Congress here in Barcelona. And today is about the future and the way we are going to live in it. I'm personally convinced a smart city requires also smart mobility systems. And smart mobility can't go without cities that become smart. Mobility is a crucial factor in urban life. for the people who live in cities, as well as for decision makers and for investors. And we at Audi want the car to be an essential part of a smart mobility system, giving back space to cities rather than covering more, giving time back to people rather than wasting it in traffic jams or in search for parking. In short, improving quality of urban life. And therefore, we think that the car gets bigger than the car in the future. In 2010, we started our Audi Urban Future Initiative. We talked to cities and experts from all over the world, and we found out no two cities are alike, but there are similar patterns. That gave us a starting point to develop tailor-made technology for specific urban challenges. Piloted parking or piloted driving is only an example. And technologies like these are fascinating, but of course, they don't end in themselves. This morning, we presented the Audi Urban Future Partnerships. We started to implement these solutions in the city context, and our goal is to increase the efficiency of driving and to explore solutions for an overall traffic management. The constellation you see right here at the podium describes what it takes to make the vision of a smart city come true. It is a new quality of cooperations. And if we want to make it work, all relevant stakeholders need to get involved. So we want the platform where we acquired, together with Mercedes and BMW, Nokia here, we want the platform to stay open to others, as well as interfaces like these will become the base for further cooperations. And of course, also cities can be interconnected in this digital world and in this, let's say, collaboration field. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Flausch.
Yes, good afternoon, or good late afternoon. Happy to be here and exchange with people that are not always together on this panel. I'm representing the public transport and sustainable mobility, and we're working on a worldwide basis on this. And I could speak for hours on what the contribution could be of public transport and sustainable mobility to the world of tomorrow. But I want to crack down on two stuff. The first of all is this dusty old lady that sometimes you see as public transport is no longer this way. Today a bus is nothing more. Of course, it's a piece of metals and some wheels and things of that sort. But basically, it's full of devices and IT devices that makes this a totally different animal than it used to be. The same applies for train. And we have been in data exchange and IT for ages already. 15 years ago when I joined public transport, I discovered how many data we had already, and hopefully we are still using them today and enlarging them so as to make a smarter and an intelligent transport system. And in this regard, public transport has been working a lot on integrating different modes of public transport, like tram, trains, and buses. Also integrated with other modes of transportation, like the new technology that you've been seeing around and in those days, and obviously we are working with them. We have very much given very much importance to nodes, the place where people are moving from one, because we do believe that only picking up one mode of transportation today is just nonsense. You want to go from one to the other, and you want to plan, and what we want to do is to make it as easy as possible. Like car is easy. Unfortunately for the car, which used to be the freedom, that's how it was mentioned some years ago, it's now a prison when you are in a traffic jam. And in many cities it's becoming a prison. And hopefully we can offer an alternative which is much easier to use. And obviously we can help for electrifying the system, because we have all the electric infrastructure. If you are in Barcelona, all the substations, the metro and the tramway can help for electrifying the whole city. So first of all, we are very much in it. The second thing that I want you to take away home is that public transport is also a fantastic tool for health. That's strange, you may think it. One of the major issues in America, and I don't mention Germany because I think the Germans are much more fitter, but in America, for most of them, they know that obesity is really an issue. You eat bad food, and you use your car, and you're getting fat. When you use PT, public transport, you have to walk, because the last mile is never our best solution. So you have to walk or bike, and you keep people healthier. And I'm not the only one to say so. The World Health Organization has been pushing us to work as much as possible on. So if you want to be fit and live a long life, an agreeable life, use public transport and the active mode of which is walking, biking, and from time to time car sharing, which is fine for me, because a car is also a great mode of transportation. But in an urban environment, I think it's going to be much more difficult in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So, well, you gave me a good opening for my first question. Public and private mobility systems have often had an uneasy relationship, and perhaps we've heard a little bit of that. But my question is, are we moving towards integration of public transport and private mobility? And if so, will this bring about greater equality, democracy? Or will public transportation be seen as a mode for one sector of the population and private cars for another? Mayor Curtatone, do you want to start?
Well, in the U.S., sad to say, we're not as progressive on this issue, and it's really a point of contention now. My community, Somerville, has been at the forefront of integrating the two. What we know is all the data shows that the more capacity we try to build in our highway system, roadway system, does not alleviate congestion. In Massachusetts, in the greater Boston region, where Somerville is, we're the 6th most congested region in the United States. Now, congestion is an economic killer. It certainly has a negative impact on our public health and certainly negative impacts on our environment. But in the United States, there's still an ideological struggle over the integration of two. And what we're starting to see in some other regions, city regions around the U.S., even in the more conservative states in Oklahoma City and in Phoenix and out in LA, is a move towards greater investment in public transportation. And Somerville is an advocate for that. What we see in Somerville and what we put in all our comprehensive plans is a future that is multimodal, where we shift all new vehicle trips by 50% to more expanded rail, which is coming to our city, building the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure system that incentivizes more active living. Somerville today, over the last 10 years, has transformed itself from what it was a dangerous place to bike and walk to the #1 bicycling community in the Northeast in the United States, and top 10 in biking and walking. But the automobile has a future there too. The question is, how can we plan for smarter mobility in the community? We have major growth plans in Somerville. And as that growth continues and we build greater economic opportunity, that'll bring more cars, but to be able to have a more multimodal infrastructure that has more efficient, more sustainable modes of transportation that continues to flow, much like you see in Barcelona, is the way the integration should happen. But in the United States, there's still a great divide. Yeah. And I think out of necessity, we're going to have to shift towards integration.
Yeah. Mr. Stadler, I'm sure that integration is something that you would be very interested in. But how do you integrate cars and public transport? What is Audi working on?
Yeah, I personally think we would be wrong if we would say to the society, each one and everywhere has to use always the same. There will always be a premium segment, there will always be a mass market, and I believe strongly that within young generation Y, Generation Z, they are anyhow always on. So the integration level has already started. And when it comes to the digitalization, I would say that the digitalization has the power of being disruptive. And of course, we will see by location-based databases, big data, sharing data, that it will be much more easier because technology supports that to get interconnected with railways, to get interconnected with buses, with cars, with car sharings or whatever. So I'm pretty optimistic about what's happening in the world. And when we see that in the next 20, 30 years, 60 to 70% of the world population will live in big metropolitan areas like in Shanghai, Beijing, Sao Paulo, Mexico, and so on, the mobility needs will anyhow be different in the future. And the most important thing is, are we able to have the right technologies to get shared? And I think so, because this was one of the reasons why Mercedes, BMW, and Audi acquired Nokia HERE business, because we want to have that digital mapping to create really additional services for digital business. And when it comes to, let's say, piloted driving, piloted car parking, I think we can offer something very good, very convenient, very safe to our customers, and the customer will go for it.
Mr. Flausch, I wanted to ask you, because you said that it's good to be able to take several modes of transportation, but people really don't like that. People, when they have to change and go from one and transfer to another, it's time-consuming, it's uncomfortable, and sometimes people would rather take a longer trip and have only one mode of transportation. What is your experience, and what does this say about behavior, and how do you change behavior?
I agree with you, because I remember that even in public transport, people would love to have a tramway or a train that brings them from their home to their work. But you see how cities are organized today, it's impossible. And we have indeed to change the behavior of people so that they accept it for economic reason and convenience reason. They have to change mode. So I agree with you that it is a natural thing for people to say, I'm in my car and my bubble, I listen to radio, and even if it takes me time, it's more comfortable than having to think about it, how to move. There is in German something which I like, an expression which I use from time to time, which is the umdenken, umsteigen. That means that first you have to think about what you're going to do during the day, and then you're going to decide which mode. And those 2 minutes a day, where you say, okay, I have to go to my work, I have to bring my kid to the school, I have to go to the gym, and then I have to see, you know, today it's not only work and home, it's a chain of trip on the day, and so you have to think about it. And basically what I'm saying to the public transport people, make it easy, because the car is easy. I recognize that the car, because our whole world has been designed for this. You know, if you jump in your car, you take your key of your car, you jump in it, and even if 2 miles from your home you're stuck in a traffic jam, you feel like it's normal. Except at some point in time, and that's what we're realizing now in society, is that people are getting really frustrated about this. So the idea is that in a city, and especially in dense city, not in America where it's very urban sprawl, but a dense city, I'm afraid that we will have to restrict the car use to the one who really need it. For instance, looking to a doctor, physician, he needs to go and see his patients. I think public transport or the active mode be a bit more difficult. The same for supplying the city. I mean, you don't see a tramway. I know they're doing that in some city in Germany, but you don't see a tramway bringing stuff to a shop. It may be thought about, but basically the little truck would be much more efficient. So let's accept that there will still be traffic in the city, but restricted to the one who really need it. And for the rest, I'm afraid to say, and I had a slide that I showed this morning, that if you take a road of 3.5 meter width, and you have a 1 hour, how many people can you entertain in 1 hour? With a car, 2,000 people. With a train, 100,000. So I'm afraid that in big cities, there is no other way but combining mass transit, that's how it's called in America, and I think it's the right way to do it, and combining this on the last mile with bike, walking. And if you need to go to IKEA, you're not very far from here, from IKEA, and if you need to buy a closet, of course you don't do that by public transport, and then you ride an Audi car sharing. I mean, you know, you would do it this way, or van or whatever, and you would go and buy this, and of course you don't take public transport. But this is a limited use, whereas going to the office, going to get your child at home, at school and so on, that you can do with public transport, with bike, with walking. Walking is amazing. 19,000 people per hour per direction. Walking is great. and it's affordable, I tell you. And if I was a politician, I would say, oh, if people can walk, first it's healthy and it's cheap. So why not?
Mr. Stadler, what about data? Because you mentioned that data can improve the efficiency of cars. Can data and the correct use of technology to help us guide the flow of traffic, can that solve traffic problems? And would you ascribe to anything that Mr. Flausch has said, or would you take another route?
I think first of all, we as an auto industry, we will not save the problems only by our own.
Yeah.
So I think what I mentioned before is right. We have to collaborate with city planners, with infrastructure developers, with governments, to make all people aware. And this we did some years ago. We started the Audi Urban Future Initiative to get to a close collaboration to learn from each other. And when we made the other partners and stakeholders aware about the technologies we are developing now, like piloted driving, they said, oh dear God, this could really support. When we showed them that with projects like Travolution, we interconnected our cars with the traffic lights and we got a better flow of cars. So scientifically, we got the results that we can save CO2 emissions by 20%.
Wow.
And I think it is worthwhile to use our intelligence, to use data, to use technologies to make, let's say, the world a better life. And when it comes to traffic jams, of course, this was one of the results. And our technological answer was piloted driving, because we would like to give back 1 hour of boring time to the customer, which is 1 hour of valid and valuable time. And I think technologies will drive our life anyhow. The younger generation maybe is a little bit more flexible as others, but we will see it at least in the big regions of this world, China, US, and also in Europe, believe me.
Yeah,
So-
I was just to add what Professor Stadler said, one of the things we're lacking, in the cities is how we think about planning, how mobility will reconcile with the growth of the communities and the data. And we're excited about our partnership with Audi and Somerville, because it's going to give us access to some behavioral data that's really important as we think about how we strategically plan and grow the communities. I just want to add one other thing. So much of this demographic shift, aligned so much with this demographic shift we've seen around the world and in the US, also has to do with the changing human behavior. And there are strong consumer preferences and tendencies with that. And again, that technology will help us understand that better. And there were still some myths in my city about, well, we need a parking spot for every person in the city. We need to have more parking. And again, we need to have larger streets. We're the most densely populated city in New England. We need to think more strategically and holistically about how we meet the needs of a more multimodal society that we're seeing and cultivating in our community.
So what can you do as a city leader? Do you restrict the amount of parking spaces in new buildings? Do you say that new buildings need more parking? Because if we look at examples, for example, Mexico City, still in their office buildings, they need 1 parking space per 5 employees. In contrast, in London, the only parking spaces allowed in buildings are ones for people in wheelchairs or ADA requirements.
I would lean on the side of the latter. If we're going to, I talked about, first, the automobile is going to be in existence with us forever. How we think about, in a much smarter, strategic way, of a more multimodal community as we build, that's important. But if we plan a city just for automobiles, that's what we're going to get. We need to think about growing and planning and building communities at the human scale. And the automobile has a role in that, but doing so more strategically, utilizing technology, the deployment of interesting technology like Audi's deploying to understand how we plan the future is critical. So in Somerville, we are shifting away from the former there. We had zoning in place, and still in some parts of the city that we're changing, where it says for every 100 square feet of a commercial entity, we'll have you need a parking spot. But that's not the way society acts. Again, with this great shift in demographics, and our cities, there's a change in consumer and human behavior. People want convenient choices. They need automobiles. They're going to want to access car sharing, but they want to bike and walk more. And again, we know that building extra capacity in our roadways and more parking spots does not alleviate congestion and does not drive us to a positive result.
Yeah, I think, remember, in the US, one of the words was no parking, no business. You see, that was the theory in some days. So I think we ought to use some methodology, which I'm sure is used by international agencies, about how to look at mobility in the future. This methodology is very well known. I'm sorry for people who knows about it, but let me explain it. It's called the ASI, Avoid, Shift, Improve. And what I complain about is that most of the time, and I'm sorry for my neighbor here, is that the automotive industry is talking a lot about improve. Technology is kind of attracting, the hope and expectation of everybody. We're going to settle everything with technology. This is, I'm afraid, though I'm a friend of technology and I like technology for public transport, it's not true. We need a balanced approach to the mobility issue. Avoid means working on parking restriction. It's avoiding bad urban planning. You know, like I'm always telling this about Paris, they don't like it. But in fact, in Paris, everybody lives on the eastern side of Paris and everybody work on the western side. That means that every day there's a big commute of people, which is totally crazy, of course. So if you had a smart urban planning, you would have people working closer to their home. The same congestion charge. Congestion charge is a way to say, okay, with the way we regulate life of people, and that's about behavior, is how do you do that in your capitalistic work? It's asking the price. If you have a useless trip, you don't pay for it, so you restrict your own use of your car. If you have to pay, like in London, £12 a day, then you think about going with your car. And if you go to London, you'll see there are very few people using their car in the center of London, or except those who really need it. That's avoid. Then the shift, which is for me the core of the whole thing. How do we shift? Because we don't have space in the city. I mean, maybe in Dallas you can still have space, but in a city like London or Barcelona, if you have too many cars, there is restricted space. So we have to find a way to have more people in the same coaches or the same... And then, of course, to improve. I just don't want to eject the improve part of it, which means that, like public transport, like the car industry, we have to use technology so as to improve the way we work. But that should be a balanced approach and not just concentrating all our effort on technology, which is good, but not enough.
But can I just add something to that?
Sure.
Because I once wanted to be said that said technology was the panacea to it, but the collaboration point that Professor Stadler mentioned is critical here. As cities, not every city has the capacity to mine and cultivate the data necessary to think strategic and plan holistically. And most of the world is not made up of these large metropolitan cities. It's made up of smaller, medium, and medium-sized cities around the US. And we lack that ability. So I think what Audi's doing is really innovative. I have no problem with a company wanting to have huge profits and think of new business platforms, because I think that is not inconsistent or mutually exclusive of doing social good. And I think that's what they're trying to do here. So for a community like Somerville, I think that's a huge win for us. And for the most densely populated city in New England, there are many lessons from that we can scale up and share with cities around the world, even the larger ones, who don't do it as good as us.
Good. Good point.
Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would agree, because we should be aware that no city looks like the other one. And we can talk 1 hour using public transportation, but look for that one in Los Angeles. You will not find any public transportation. So you need to have a car. And so the needs of the society, the needs of a human being is somehow different. And I'm only fighting for, let's say, the right technological solution and for individual solutions. And I think it's worthwhile to work on that. And we started today with I would say, very good cooperation, because we learned a lot in the last few years. So space is a valuable good. If we can reduce parking lots by piloted parking, we can contribute. And even for an investor, it is very charming, because he can save money or he can reinvest money to another sector. And what we learned is that space and time needs to get a new form of currency. So also the society should be aware that nothing is for free. And we have to work together to get that one done, to make life in the metropolitan areas much more valid in the future.
Mr. Flausch, you mentioned about Paris. People live on one side and work on the other side. But you must admit that technology has allowed the shift in the workplace. Now people don't need to go to the office 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, or 35 hours. Many people can work from their home, they can work from the cafe, they can work from the bus, the train, they can work anywhere. So this idea that technology can't solve a problem, my question would be, what about technology not related directly to transportation, but related to the user, related to the individual, and how is that changing our societies and our need for transportation?
I think you're right, and I hope everybody understood that technology is an enabler, of course, for many things. But I want to give you an example. Some 25 years ago, when the new technology came, like, internet or whatever, the idea was, we'll all go on the countryside and work from home in I take the example of the City of London. Do you imagine the City of London, or this financial center of the world, being in the middle of, close to Birmingham, in the middle of Somerset? No, the people, the value of the city is that you get people together in the city. And they want to be part of that ecosystem, the financial ecosystem. Even if they use internet and all the nice technology, basically, they want to be together. And that's the added value of city. And that's why London didn't lose his city. They didn't lose it, they're still there. Why? They want to change job. They want to talk to their peers. That's the value of city. And that's why city has been created. So I do agree that technology is a great enabler. But it's, as such, it's just a tool to make things easier, less cost, less expensive, to make life easier. I agree, I fully agree. And public transport, and we're using this as much. Because we're talking about smart city, what I think is what this technology will enable us to be, instead of being blind and stupid like we were 25 years ago, now we can match demand and supply. Now we can know when you say, I want to go and have a bike, but I have my bike there. Where do I put my bike when I'm finished with the bike? Now technology allows you to say there is a parking station where there is available space for your bike. This is an enabler, but still, at the beginning, it's not only, it's just combining stuff more than just being stuck with one option.
Mr. Stadler, I wanted to ask you, when we think of words like global warming, sustainability, and the quality of urban environment, they're all concerns in our cities. And can we hope that mobility and our methods of mobility might become part of the solution and not be part of the problem for these concepts and for these terms?
I think the automobile will be part of a solution, because other way around, the business cases would never work. And when it comes to climate change, CO2 emission, air quality, I think there is a very clear agenda which is fixed in the automotive sector, that the auto sector will reduce carbon emissions. We are working heavily on the electrification of the drivetrain. There is coming up the fuel cell technology in the future, but I think it is only a matter of timing and to get it right done, but not a matter of yes or no. I think this agenda is very, very clear. And in that respect and in that way, I think also we as an automotive industry, we can contribute to a better life of people in the inner circle of a city.
Mayor Curtatone, I'm sure you've been monitoring CO2 emissions, monitoring the quality of the urban environment. What changes have you seen in your city?
Well, we're proud. Somerville set out a goal 2 years ago to be carbon neutral by 2050. How do we get there, Kristen? And I'm proud that Will was the first mayor in Massachusetts to sign the Compact of Mayors for Climate Change, and they'll be meeting in Paris in a couple of weeks. But we all have to be part of the solution. Certainly the car has to be part of that solution. We know in my city, now my city is approximately 10 and a half square kilometers. We had just short of 20 rail and trolley stops up until mid-century. Those were taken away, and came the major interstate highways, secondary arterials. We cut people off from one another. We saw more particulates in the air. We saw consequences to our economy. High rates of heart disease and respiratory illness in that category, having grown up next to the highway. And we know in the Boston area, so much of Boston is going to be underwater if we don't have bold behavioral change towards climate change. And it's a major challenge for cities, but cities have been at the center of setting the standard for strong environmental stewardship. So in my community, I'm proud that we lead with our values, where we want to be by 2050. We've opened up the city, much like we're doing Audi, as a center for innovation and mobility and exploring new concepts, but also with the green technology community, we've opened up the city as an idea to launch new piloted platforms and new technologies to help us develop a strategic plan to attack sustainability. But mobility and solving the mobility issue will be a critical link to all that. How we move, how we live, how we relieve congestion, and how we reduce greenhouse gas emissions to our community and all our cities around the world is certainly a critical component to that.
Is that something that citizens of your community understand?
They're leading the way. The one thing about being the mayor of Somerville is this is part of our DNA. We set out a community comprehensive plan about who we wanted to be by 2030, not what we wanted to build. And again, the strong concepts of mobility, being multimodal, being sustainable, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, being carbon neutral, they're all in that. So it's really a community-based effort in Somerville. We're real proud of that.
I have one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. It has to do with mobility and cities of the future, viable cities. Density is something that we talk about. When I look into the future, I'm not sure what we'll see in terms of cities. I think back in terms of mobility, and I could never, 10, 15 years ago, I didn't imagine car sharing or Uber or other types of systems for mobility. What are we looking at as we look in the future in terms of the structure of our cities? How will we live in them? And perhaps, Mr. Stadler, you'd like to answer because you have the Urban Innovation Program, and I think that's some ways a vision into the future that the initiative of your company in different places around the world. So what can we look forward to?
I think we will see somehow in 10, 20 years a very green mobility. There will be a certain kind of individual mobility because this is belonging to the human being. But all the mobility and transport issues will be totally interconnected. I'm really sure because the technology is available, the technology is smart, and with that type of technology we are able to solve one problem. This is the total cost of ownership. And with the total cost of ownership reduction, I think we make mobility feasible for the human being. And no human being, as far as I know, wants to drive in an ugly car. They want to have an emotional car, a sexy environment. We will see a totally different user experience in the car because you make use of your time when you are going by piloted driving. And maybe the speed in the inner circle of a city is a totally different one to a speed which is allowed on the highway. And therefore, if people are able to Skype, to communicate with friends, with whatever, they don't matter if there is a certain kind of traffic jam, which we probably will also see in the next few years. And I remember always when I go to China, the young Chinese customers define their level of liberty in owning a car, in having a car, or being mobile. And this is a very techie generation, young generation, and I feel pretty optimistic because mobility is needed. We will organize the so-called green mobility and to a maximum level interconnected with the needs of our customers.
Great. Mr. Flausch, how do you see the city of the future in relation to public transportation?
I'm afraid that, I'm trying to be very tolerant, but I think the vision of my neighbor is really not my vision of the future. I'm sorry to say so, with all politeness and courtesy. I do believe that, first of all, the green traffic jam is still a traffic jam. So, whether we want to spend, in some countries, the loss of national product is up to 10% because of traffic jam. So it's a huge loss, like in India, things of that. It's impossible. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think I see a city. I know everybody loves the American model of everybody having this small house with 2 cars parked before. It's no longer affordable. It's just impossible. And so we have to accept that if we continue having a growing population in the city, we need to change our behavior. And in terms of climate change, in terms of livability, pleasure to live in a city, connecting with people, I have only one example that I want to promote every time I can, is Copenhagen. What is Copenhagen? It's a city where it's very often cold, very often difficult to live. Though, in 1962, they opened the first major commercial street pedestrianized. Today, the market share of bike is 40%, including the winter. 32% public transport, and the rest is walking. 25% car. That's a good balance. That means that we need cars. I agree, we need cars. But in Copenhagen, what do you see? People that talk to each other. They have reviewed the whole urban space. People are, by -5 degrees, having glasses of white wine, which they didn't have 40 years ago. chatting with each other. That's a new world. It's a new world of community. Boys and girls, small boys are playing on the street. We no longer see this. If you go to Dallas, nobody would have a kid being on the street. But they're in Copenhagen, in the court, they are there and they're playing again. That's what I want. But I do share with them. I do share with them that it's a personal choice, but eventually it's a requirement. I'm afraid we are hitting the wall now. And although I understand it, if I was in the position of my neighbor that I want to sell my car, to some extent, I think if we're selling a car to all Chinese and to all Indian, we're going to all die. We're going to all die because it will be impossible to breathe. So let's face it, it's not a question of choice, it's a question of necessity.
Okay. Mayor?
So I believe, the future, well, it depends on how we envision it. Do we see the importance of building a future at the human scale or building it for cars? And I don't want to speak for my new friend and colleague from Audi. I don't think he's proposing that we build it for cars, but we plan our cities smarter. Now, I've been to China for the first time recently. I was in Hong Kong, Beijing, Guangzhou, and fascinating cities. However, the infrastructure they built was totally for a car society. And the impact socially, environmentally, and economically are clear as day. And I think they're lending to the great divide between gross national product and social progress in that country. And in my city, we see that divide. When we see that density done right, leveraged correctly, creates a more sustainable future. So we outlined in our city with the neighborhoods we want to conserve, where we want to enhance with the advent of transit, and where we want to transform with greater density, greater AFARs, but create the street grids, the smart mobility planning, where congestion doesn't, because congestion alone, you can have all the growth plans you want, congestion will kill your economic plans, and we know the social health and environmental consequences, done in a way that we build that sustainable future. And funny we mentioned Dallas, there are parts of Massachusetts that has less density than North Dallas. I think a lot of it has to do with our policy, zoning requirements, our planning. That has lent itself to cultivating environments that influence the outcomes we're seeing today, the world today. So it has to be a collaborative approach. But I see density done right, planned right, with the tenets of smart growth and transit-oriented development done at a human scale is the way forward.
Great, thank you. Great. Now let's take one or two questions from the audience. We just have a couple minutes, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, and there are microphones in the center. Can't see. Does anyone have? Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. I have a question for all of you. My name is Luis Roda, the public bus operator in Valencia, and we are all talking about car sharing, collaborative mobility. But the question is, how is public administrator going to take care about quality of those services, safety, insurance, and the most important thing, how we are going to tax it?
Okay. Did you understand?
Is that for me?
Yeah, if you want to, because there's a big debate here against Uber, because it's seen as a way of avoiding taxes.
Unfair competition.
And that.
So I'm happy to answer first. So it's a great debate in every major metropolitan, I guess, and the great Uber or Lyft debate, and I'll talk about the greater Boston region. We had this massive hearing up at the state legislature recently. I'm a proponent of having, personally, I think, in what consumer behavior based on population shift today demands is having new choices, innovative choices to transportation. So in Massachusetts, we're having the same debate, especially around the greater Boston metropolitan region. There's certainly an equity issue between the taxi drivers and the Uber, but populations are demanding, just like they want to have information at their fingertips quicker. They want more newer, innovative forms of transportation at their fingertips. This is why Uber's taken off worldwide. I don't know if you asked me how we would tax it. Was that a question? Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. If there's a good way to make money, we'll think about it. But right now we're trying to. I don't believe you stifle innovation. I see that industry is an innovative industry. What we're trying to encourage in our communities is a lagging, really, I think, static form, a business model in the taxi industry to be more innovative with that, to change its model, because no matter what policies you want to implement, that is what consumer behavior is dictating. This is the type of service and choices we want. That's not going to go away. So yes, we are also struggling with regulation. How do we regulate it? How do we assert safety? you know, that everybody's on an even scale with safety and background checks. But the one thing I think we're collectively and uniformly aligned to is not to stifle new innovative forms of technology
Okay,
or, or services.
anybody else? Okay.
Everything said.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Another question? Yes, sir.
I've got a question for Mr. Flausch, maybe. Some days ago, we witnessed the terrible terror attacks in Paris. Do you think that they kind of impact on your vision of public transport and people using public transport simply because people are too afraid to use public space or public transport? And can you react to that in any way?
Yeah, unfortunately, what happened in Paris will have an impact because mass transit it may mean more risk than it ever has. So I do believe it's not a good day for public transportation. As you remember, here in Spain, they had the Atocha issue, the bombing here. And obviously, public transport is very vulnerable for this sort of attack. But my personal view is that if we don't want those guys, those terrible guys, to win, we have to continue the way we do. And we should immediately continue having our metro system working. For 2 days they were stopped, I understand. It was a police order that, you know, in Paris you couldn't run the trains. But the sooner the better we go on and show the people that, yeah, we are not afraid. Now, that doesn't guarantee that there will not be other attacks. I'm not sure, you know, have you seen in Paris, the attacks were not against the metro. It was against people in some gathering somewhere on some terrace of coffee shops and things of that sort. So it's the life in the city which is at stake. And the more, you know, we have people agglomerate in the city, the riskier it will be. But will we stop for those guys? No. My personal view, we have to stay and go on this way. And eventually what we as population must accept, that whenever there will be more control, and not too many control, but control, it's acceptable because we are in a state of war. And you know, when you travel by air, I'm afraid that the control will be stricter. And we have to accept it, unfortunately. I don't like it, but I think as a citizen we have to say, okay, the states are legitimate in doing so because we are in a very difficult position now.
Great, thank you. One more question? Is there anyone else that would like to ask something? Yes.
Okay, I'm from Mexico, so I already know what is to live like 4 or 3 hours from where you wanna be. So okay, and another question. I mean, that's the statement. The question is, how can we think about to keep everyone in a safe place, in a very nice place? I mean, not just because you are allowed to have a car, to be with this safety and this comfort. I mean, if you can pay for it, okay, but this kind of consumption manner is the thing that we are being living, that make us to think about all new ways to make consumption, not just because it's nicer. So how can we make like this democracy in our lives? For everyone, not just like the ones who can afford it. Thank you.
Great. So would somebody like to take this question? How can technology, how can our vision of the future approach more equitable distribution of mobility?
Maybe I will try to answer. I think what we talked before is it is about total cost of ownership. And of course we have to find somehow a certain kind of currency. What we are doing at the moment with the project in Santa Fe in Mexico City is to create a, let's say, a data-driven mobility platform which is sourced by people, by their own needs. And maybe this is one form of democratic, let's say, platforms where we can support. And Audi is supporting that because this was based on a need and a desire of people being stuck in traffic. And maybe we will see in the future, let's say, bringing the total cost of ownership down so that the access for more people is better in terms of mobility, even if it is public transport, if it is private transport, or whatever. I think this flexibility we should aim for in the future.
Great.
Maybe I can add something. You know that a car is used 1 hour, as an average, 1 hour per day. So imagine what the capital is sunk in a car, 1 hour a day of use out of 24. But then coming back to the total cost of ownership, there's a lot of room for improvement. But then, let's think in terms of urban development. I know it takes time, but having dense city doesn't mean awful city. You have good architects, good urban planners, making cities which are agreeable even for those who are not rich, or they are middle size or even low side. And that's really the challenge for today, because transportation is fine, but housing is even more important. Housing in a pleasant place for everybody is something which I think is the core of democracy. And of course, it takes time, because you can't change your city the way, anyway, in Mexico City, you know how it is for the last 25 or 30 years. But we have some leaders that are convinced that urban planning is a major competence for them. And they would have a vision, but they have to develop that vision for equality for everybody in terms of housing.
Great. We'll give.
I just want to add, I agree with what has been said. In my community, in Union Square, we're a partnership with Audi, where we're working on a project. We will be building 600 square meters of new development, breaking ground sometime in the next 18 to 24 months. And this more, how do you empower community? How does everyone have a chance to participate? One of the issues we're struggling in the Boston region is gentrification. We're the second most gentrified region outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. Who gets to participate, not just in the planning, but own that future? We're not just going to stop the market force around gentrification. How can we leverage that to reinvest back into community values, into local, independently owned businesses that start up and want to maintain and be part of that future? People, how can we give people a real, authentic, true choice to stay in the community, to really be there if they want to be there? So along with the incredible amount of community-based urban planning we're doing around with trying to understand the future of mobility, reconciled against the backdrop of urbanization, is how do we empower community and enhance democracy and give them true, authentic choices to be part of that for the long term.
Great. I think on that note, and because it's the end of this session, please join me in thanking our guests for their very diverse and insightful viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Whoops.